The forest seemed to breathe in sync with them. At first, it was only a trick of exhaustion. They had been hiking for 6 hours, boots soaked through with the cold seep of moss and runoff, lungs aching from the climb. The trail had thinned into suggestion, then vanished entirely beneath a tangle of roots that twisted like knotted muscle across the forest floor. Every step released the smell of damp bark and old rot, rich, fungal, sweet in a way that felt almost bruised. Lena stopped first. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Marcus listened. Wind moved high in the canopy. A distant, oceanic hush. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked. Nothing unusual. "Hear what?" "The pause," she said. They stood still, for bodies in a clearing too circular to be accidental. Inhale. The canopy brightened, subtly, green light filtering through leaves like a diaphragm opening. Exhale. The light dimmed, shadows lengthening toward them as if the sun itself had blinked. Jonah laughed, too loudly. "Cloud cover. It's just clouds." But there were no clouds. The sky above was a hard, uninterrupted blue, visible through the netted branches. Inhale. The moss at their feet lifted, almost imperceptibly. Not enough to be seen outright, enough to be felt. The soil beneath Lena's boots softened and swelled, pressing upward like a slow pulse. Exhale. The ground settled. A faint sound accompanied it. A low, fibrous shifting, like roots tightening under tension. Marcus swallowed. "It's just us breathing." They tested it. He drew a slow breath in. The forest brightened. Jonah exhaled sharply. The trees around them seemed to lean a fraction closer, trunks tilting inward with a creak so soft it might have been imagination. The circle tightened. No one spoke for a while. The silence between breaths grew heavy, oppressive. It was not the absence of sound but the suspension of it. No insects hummed. No birds called. Even the wind seemed to wait, as if unsure when it was allowed to move. Lena bent, pressing her palm against the earth. It was warm, not sun-warmed, internally warm. The heat radiated upward in a slow rhythm that matched her own racing pulse. When she lifted her hand, an imprint remained in the moss, filling gradually as the green surface rose and fell like the flank of some sleeping animal. "Okay," she whispered. "That's not normal." Jonah stepped backward and froze. The trees behind him had shifted. He hadn't seen them move, but the spacing was wrong. The gaps narrower, the bark darker, the trunks curved, subtly bent at their midpoints as if their weight had redistributed toward the clearing's center. Inhale. The smell intensified. Damp bark and loam thickened into something almost respiratory, humid and intimate, like air exhaled from a mouth too close to his own. Exhale. A soft, collective contraction rippled through the roots, the ground tightening under their boots. Marcus felt it clamp around the heel of his shoe, just briefly, then loosen again. "Don't breathe so fast," Lena said. But they were. Their fear accelerated the rhythm. Short, sharp inhalations. The canopy flickered in response. Bright, dim, bright, like a failing light bulb struggling to keep pace. The forest adjusted. It slowed. The swell beneath them deepened, stretching the interval between pulses, forcing them into its tempo. Inhale. Long drawn, heavy. The moss rose higher this time, enough that Lena stumbled as the ground shifted beneath her weight. The roots nearest her ankle flexed, not wrapping, not yet, but testing. Exhale. The trees leaned further. Bark groaned as fibers strained. Fine debris, powdered lichen, dry flecks of bark, drifted down in a quiet rain. Jonah backed away again, turning in a slow circle. "They're closer," he said. "They're definitely closer." Marcus tried to steady himself. "We're disoriented. It's the light. The shadows are moving." "They're moving with us," Lena said. She stepped left. The nearest tree followed. Not by stepping, but by a subtle, gliding adjustment of its trunk, roots sliding through soil with a sound like tendons shifting in a wrist. Jonah bolted. He made it 3 strides before the ground rose sharply in front of him, a sudden swell of moss and dirt that buckled his knees. He fell hard, palms sinking into the warm, pulsing earth. It beat beneath him, not random, responsive. He pushed up, gasping. Inhale. The canopy darkened this time instead of brightening, as if the forest had reversed the exchange, drawing light inward rather than offering it. Exhale. The silence crushed down. Something deeper moved. Not the shallow surface roots, not the trees adjusting their stance. This was lower, far beneath the reach of sunlight. A massive, slow displacement that shifted the entire clearing by degrees. Soil compressed. Air displaced from underground cavities in a damp, muffled sigh. Marcus felt a pressure behind his eyes, a subtle tug, as if his thoughts had weight. Lena did too. Memories surfaced unbidden. A childhood lake. The smell of her father's coat in winter. Grief she had folded small and buried. The forest inhaled. The warmth intensified. The moss swelled higher than before, pressing against their calves. The smell of damp bark turned almost sweetly rancid, like something digesting. "It's sinking with us," Marcus whispered. "Not just breathing." Jonah stared at the ground, horror dawning slowly. "It's learning." They tried to control it, slowed their breathing deliberately. The forest matched them. Then subtly it led. The inhale came before theirs, a swelling beneath their feet. Their lungs filled reflexively to keep balance. Exhale. Roots tightened, gripping ankles more firmly now. Not enough to trap, enough to anchor. Lena squeezed her eyes shut. "Don't think about anything," she said. Too late. The pressure behind her skull sharpened. Images flickered in the dimming light, not visible exactly, but felt. Her grandmother's kitchen, the sound of hospital monitors, Marcus's guilt over a brother he never called back, Jonah's unspoken fear of dying unseen. The forest inhaled deeply. The clearing brightened in a sickly, luminous green. The moss rose almost to their shins, undulating visibly now, an immense lung inflating beneath a thin membrane of soil. Exhale. The roots constricted. Jonah screamed as something tightened around his wrist, not breaking skin but pressing hard enough to bruise. He tore free, leaving a smear of damp earth on his sleeve. "It's feeding," he said, "not on flesh, on rhythm, on the quickened tempo of their panic, the spike of memory, the rush of emotion flooding their systems." Every inhale they drew carried more than air. It carried recollection, fear, attachment. The forest mirrored it all. Marcus forced himself still. He closed his eyes and emptied his mind as best he could, slowed his breath to a near halt. The clearing hesitated. The canopy dimmed and did not immediately brighten again. The moss hovered in an uncertain swell. Lena followed his lead. Jonah tried, but fear trembled through him too violently. Inhale. The forest responded strongest to him. The ground surged beneath his feet. Roots coiled at his ankles with unmistakable intent. The trees nearest him leaned sharply inward, bark splitting with soft, wet cracks. "Jonah," Marcus said quietly, "you have to calm down." "I can't," he choked. Exhale. The silence after this one did not release. It held. The forest did not breathe out fully. It waited. The canopy remained dim. The moss stayed swollen. The pressure underfoot intensified as if something below had paused mid-inhalation. Savoring. Then Lena understood. "It wants us steady," she whispered. "It wants us alive, not prey to devour." Instruments, metronomes. The unseen depth beneath the clearing shifted again, vast and deliberate. The soil parted slightly between them, a hairline fissure forming in the center of the circle. From within it emanated a deeper warmth and a faint vibration that resonated in their chests. It was not random. It was anticipatory. Marcus felt it align with his heartbeat. Not matching, replacing. The next inhale did not belong to him. It rose from the ground, lifting his chest as if invisible hands had cupped his ribs. Air flooded his lungs against his will. The forest brightened in perfect harmony. Exhale. The roots tightened not to restrain, but to connect. Fine tendrils pressed against their boots, their skin through fabric, mapping pulse points. Jonah's breathing stuttered, then synchronized unwillingly with the deeper rhythm. His terror flattened into something glassy and distant. The clearing stabilized. Inhale, exhale. The forest no longer followed them. They followed it. The trees straightened slightly, not retreating, but settling into a closer ring. The canopy dimmed to a twilight green that would not lift. The moss continued its slow rise and fall, steady and immense. Beneath the fissure, something vast shifted with satisfaction. Lena tried to speak but found her voice moving only on the forest's exhale. Words did not form unless permitted by the rhythm. Marcus understood then, not in language but in sensation. The forest had not been reacting. It had been tuning, their breaths, their memories, their fear, calibrating them to its own ancient cycle. The fissure widened another fraction. Warmth spilled upward like a patient tide. Inhale. All four of them drew breath together, perfectly synchronized. Exhale. The roots eased, no longer testing, no longer tightening. They held them gently, as one might hold a pulse beneath the skin. And somewhere far below, in the buried dark where the soil grew impossibly warm and thick, something vast and unseen began to breathe more easily. For new rhythms joining its own, steady and enduring, beneath the patient, predatory wilderness. Their campsite was surrounded by feathers, none of them from local birds. They lay in a loose ring beyond the fire pit, scattered with unsettling precision. Not drifted by wind, not shed in a struggle, placed. At first light, Mara thought they were birch bark curls, pale against the loam. Then she stepped closer and saw the sheen. Each feather was nearly the length of her forearm. Some were bone-white, matte and porous like something carved from old ivory. Others shimmered with a deep oil-slick iridescence. Greens and violets sliding across their surfaces when the light shifted, though the sun had barely risen high enough to justify the color. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," Owen said quietly behind her. Mara crouched. The barbs were intact, perfectly aligned, yet the texture was wrong. Instead of the soft give of down, these resisted her touch, cool and faintly rigid, like layered parchment. When she pressed her thumb against one, it did not bend. It flexed, then returned to its shape with a faint, papery sigh. The forest around them was too still. They had hiked 2 days beyond the last marked trail. Navigating by compass and a hand-drawn topographic map Owen insisted was reliable. No roads, no cell signal, no distant hum of human life. Just miles of old-growth forest. Hemlock, cedar, spruce, their trunks rising straight and patient from a floor thick with damp needles and moss. Now that moss smelled different. The usual scent of wet earth and rot was overlaid with something older, dry and dusty, like a long-abandoned attic filled with molted things. The smell of old feathers. How would something this big even fly in here? Owen murmured. There were no drag marks, no blood, no sign of a carcass, just the ring. Mara stood slowly, scanning the tree line. The trees felt closer than they had the night before. Their trunks seemed to lean subtly inward, narrowing the clearing by inches. The canopy above was dense, but she could have sworn there had been more sky visible when they pitched the tent. A breeze moved through, or rather something approximating a breeze. It came in a low, circular current, stirring the feathers without disturbing the ash in the fire pit. They rustled, not like leaves skittering across pavement, but like wings adjusting mid-fold. A layered, deliberate sound. Owen stepped back toward the tent. His boot brushed a feather, and it shifted to face him. Not blown, turned. They both froze. "That was the wind," he said quickly. There was no wind now. The silence pressed against their ears, dense and total. No insects whirred. No distant birds called. Even the faint ticking of cooling metal from their camp stove seemed swallowed whole. Mara's pulse quickened. The feathers nearest her boot trembled in response. Not violently, just a faint vibration that traveled outward through the ring, as though connected by some unseen filament. Owen noticed it too. "Don't move," he whispered. The forest answered with a distant sound, soft and rhythmic. A rustling overhead. They both looked up. The canopy shifted, branches swaying in a slow ripple that moved against the direction of the breeze they had felt earlier. Needles shivered, though no birds burst upward. No shapes crossed the sky. The rustling deepened, layered. Not wind through leaves, wings, but too many, and too synchronized. The sound circled them without ever revealing a source. Mara turned slowly, trying to map the clearing in her mind. The fallen log she'd stepped over last night was no longer to the north of their tent. It sat several feet east now, half obscured by ferns that she did not remember. That log wasn't there, she said. Owen followed her gaze, his mouth tightening. It was, he said, just not there. They took a cautious step toward the treeline. The forest shifted. Not visibly at first, just a subtle reorientation. The path they had used to enter the clearing no longer aligned with the direction of the rising sun. The angle was wrong, the slope inconsistent. Owen pulled out the compass. The needle spun lazily before settling on a bearing that contradicted everything around them. That's not possible, he breathed. Another feather drifted down from above. It did not fall naturally. It descended slowly, almost hovering, rotating with measured grace until it landed at Mara's feet, pointed toward her. This quill pressed lightly into the soil, marking, a warning, or an invitation. The smell intensified. Damp earth mingled with that attic dust scent, thick enough to taste. Mara felt it at the back of her throat, dry and papery. The rustling returned, closer now. The trees along the perimeter seemed to have straightened, their trunks aligning in a near-perfect circle. The clearing was smaller, intimate. Owen reached for her hand. "Pack up," he said softly. "We leave. Now." They moved carefully, deliberate in every motion. With each quickened breath, the feathers trembled again. Subtle but undeniable. Their fear rippled through the ring. Mara forced herself to inhale slowly. The feathers stilled. Owen's breathing, however, remained uneven. Above them, something adjusted its weight. A low creak of branches bending under mass. Too heavy for any bird native to these woods. The rustling ceased all at once. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara felt it then. Not sight, not sound, but a pressure between her shoulder blades. The unmistakable sensation of being measured, catalogued. Owen zipped the tent too fast. The sharp metallic sound split the quiet. Every feather in the clearing lifted a fraction of an inch off the ground. Not blown upward, raised, as if responding to a signal too deep to hear. They hovered for a breathless second, thousands of pale and iridescent shapes suspended around them like a frozen explosion. Then they settled. Closer. The ring tightened by a foot. Owen's composure cracked. "It's hurting us." Mara's gaze drifted upward again. Through a break in the canopy, she saw movement. Not a shape, a distortion. As though the sky itself flexed around something vast and patient, its outline bending light without ever becoming visible. Another feather descended. Then another, each one landing with its quill angled inward. Toward them, the trees creaked softly, adjusting. The compass needle spun again. Owen grabbed the packs. "Pick a direction," he said. "Any direction." They stepped toward what should have been west. The forest opened briefly, then folded. The same clearing greeted them from the opposite side. The same tent, the same ring. More feathers now, stacked too deep. Mara's breath hitched. The rustling resumed, directly overhead. A slow, ceremonial sweep of wings. Not attacking, not yet. Marking, claiming. She understood then with cold clarity. The feathers were not warning them away. They were outlining a boundary. And the circle was not to keep something out. It was to keep them in. Owen staggered back as another feather brushed his shoulder. It left no wound. Only a faint dusting of pale powder that clung to his jacket like pollen. The smell deepened. Old, ancient, patient. The rustling shifted into a rhythm, slow and deliberate, matching the cadence of their breathing. Mara realized with dawning horror that the feathers were rising and falling in time with them. Not reacting, sinking. Above, the distortion in the canopy lowered imperceptibly. Close enough now that the air felt compressed. Close enough that she could hear a final, heavy adjustment of wings far too large for any living taxonomy she knew. Another feather drifted down. Bone-white, pristine. It landed between them, quill first, and sank into the soil like a stake. The circle tightened once more. And in the silence that followed, Mara understood what the feathers represented. Not remains, not warnings, but invitations. Every feather a promise that something vast had chosen this place, and was waiting for them to molt.